What really happens 1 year after death. The soul's journey beyond time. 1. The final breath and the first awakening. The room is silent, not the kind of silence that merely lacks noise, but a stillness that seems to breathe on its own. A sacred pause. Sometimes it's in a hospital, where fluorescent lights hum softly above still bodies. Other times, it's in a familiar bedroom, surrounded by old photographs, loved ones whispering goodbye, and sometimes it's no one. Just the soul and the quiet. The body stops moving. The heart, a lifelong drummer, lays down its rhythm, and the breath, that tireless companion, coming and going without needing permission, exhales one final time. But contrary to what we've been taught, that is not the end. In fact, it is where something ancient begins, what the eye cannot see, and what science has only begun to suspect, is that at this precise instant, consciousness does not disappear. It simply loosens its grip on matter. The soul, the very core of our being, what the Hermetics called the divine spark, and what ancient Egyptians saw as the Ba. The mobile aspect of the spirit begins a sacred unfolding, not a violent separation, but a release. A soft unthreading of the ties that once held it to skin and bone. Imagine a knotted rope, worn over decades by memories, regrets, love, and longing. Now, slowly, it's untangling, not breaking, but easing its way open. This is not a switch being flipped. This is a soul returning to itself. Countless near-death experiences have offered us fragments of this mystery. A sudden lightness, a feeling of immense peace, or floating above one's own body watching, not with fear, but with a strange calm. I saw myself. Many say, I heard their voices, but they didn't hear me. The moment the body lies still, the awareness is often still vividly awake, just no longer tethered to flesh. In esoteric traditions, from the silver cord, described in Ecclesiastes, to the teachings of Theosophy and Rosicrucianism, it is said that the soul is connected to the physical body through an energetic thread. Some call it the silver cord, a luminous connection between realms. As life fades, this cord thins, elongates, and eventually dissolves. That dissolution marks not death, but freedom. And yet, not every soul knows how to be free. Some pass gently, like a leaf carried by the wind. Others resist, bewildered. Especially in moments of trauma accidents, heart attacks, violent endings, the soul may feel trapped between dimensions, trying to speak, but hearing no answer, trying to wake, but finding no form to rise in. Can you imagine it? Waking up in a room you've always known, but no one sees you. You speak, but your voice vanishes in the air. You try to touch your daughter's hand, and your own passes through hers like mist. This is not a horror story. This is the liminal screen between where the spirit begins its first confrontation with a truth it didn't expect. I am still here, but not there. For many, this phase becomes the threshold of recognition. Consciousness remains intact. Thoughts, emotions, even desires persist. But the world no longer responds. The hands that once held, the doors once opened, none of them move now. It is like being present and invisible. And so begins a strange awakening. The soul still carrying its human memories, attachments, identities may try to go home, finish unfinished business, speak to loved ones, but nothing listens anymore. The spiritual texts of Kabbalah speak of this as the realm of echoes, where the soul shouts into the world of form, but only silence returns. This is why, in the hours and days immediately following death, some souls linger, not because they are lost, but because they haven't yet understood. They hover over hospital beds. They ride beside ambulances. They sit beside grieving children. The time, space they once knew, no longer behaves the same. And the grief of the living, like a fog, holds them close. In Tibetan Buddhism, this phase is called the bardo, a transitional dimension between life and rebirth. It is a place of visions and illusions, shaped by the mind's own expectations. The unprepared soul may be frightened. The awakened one may find peace, but all pass through it. In Spiritism, this moment is described not with fear, but with urgency. The soul must be helped to recognize its state, to elevate its vibration, to let go of the earth. It's not abandonment, it's encouragement. For those who nurtured spiritual awareness in life, who practiced presence, compassion, or simple gratitude, the process is smoother. They feel the arrival of light. They hear the silent language of guides. They see not shadows, but invitations. There are hands, metaphorical or literal, that reach out from realms unseen. They do not force, they wait patiently, because the soul is not being punished, it is being welcomed. And this, perhaps, is one of the most powerful truths veiled from our modern world. Death is not exile, it is return. A return to source, to frequency, to the vibration from which we came. But the path of return is shaped by what we carried. The last breath ends the body's song, but for the soul, it is the overture to a grander symphony. And so, we begin this journey not into oblivion, but into the luminous unknown. 2. The 7 days of transition, where spirit meets memory. It is said in many ancient traditions, whispered in monasteries, passed through the lips of elders, written in sacred scrolls now gathering dust, that the first 7 days after death form a bridge. Not a bridge of stone or wood, but one made of vibration, a corridor of subtle energy, a sacred arc. In the language of the mystics, these are the days when the soul is neither fully here nor fully gone. It hovers in between, tethered to the edges of matter, still feeling, still seeing, still remembering, but without hands to hold or feet to walk. Time, in this space, folds in on itself. Minutes stretch, hours contract. Clocks continue for the living, but the soul floats outside their tick. During these first 7 days, many souls instinctively return to what was once familiar. Some remain near the body, observing paramedics, doctors, or the ritual of death certificates being signed. Others drift beside family members riding in the back seat of a car to the funeral home, lingering at the doorstep of their childhood home. There is no fear in this hovering, only a sense of searching. The soul is trying to answer a question it hasn't yet fully formed. What just happened? And here is where the living become part of the journey, often without knowing it. Because the soul is still sensitive to vibrations, emotional, mental, even spiritual. Every tear, every whispered goodbye, every memory that passes through the mind of a grieving loved one, all of it reaches the soul like waves in a vast ocean. The emotions of the living act as currents, either lifting the spirit toward the light or keeping it close to the earth. This is why grief matters not as something to be suppressed, but to be understood. When grief is wrapped in love and release, thank you. I'll carry your light. Be free. It becomes a guiding torch. But when grief becomes a desperate clinging, don't leave me. I can't go on. It turns into a chain that, unintentionally, binds the soul to the weight it longs to transcend. The ancients knew this. In Egyptian funerary rites, priests would speak directly to the soul, encouraging it to move forward, to remember its true name Ren, and to follow the path to the Duat, the spiritual realm. In Tibetan Buddhist rituals, lamas chant guidance into the air, not for the living, but for the recently departed. In indigenous traditions, the fire is kept alive for 7 days, believed to give warmth to the wandering spirit. There is something universal about this sacred window. On the 3rd day, some traditions say, the soul becomes aware of its disconnection. The realization settles in. I'm no longer alive in the way I knew. This day is often marked by sorrow, not for death, but for what cannot be undone. The soul revisits memories. It watches its own life replay in fragments, not chronologically, but emotionally. A smell, a laugh, a moment that mattered but was never spoken aloud. On the 7th day, a shift begins. It is not always dramatic, no lightning, no heavenly voice. Sometimes, it is as gentle as a breeze, but something in the frequency of the soul changes. The vibration begins to lift, like mist rising after rain. If the soul has begun to accept its passage, if it has received the love and release of those left behind, then a door, or what some call a subtle portal, opens. And yet, it's not automatic. There are souls who linger beyond the 7 days. Souls caught in trauma, in unfinished business, in deep attachment to what they had or what they lost. They may remain at the cemetery, unable to let go of their body, or return again and again to a child's bedroom, whispering words that go unheard. This is not punishment. It's not hell. It's simply density, the soul still wrapped in the energetic layers of earthly emotion, finds it difficult to rise, not because it is denied, but because it is still entangled, like a balloon that longs to soar, but is knotted to a stake in the ground. This is where prayers, rituals, and memories of peace become medicine. When we speak their name with reverence, when we light a candle and smile at the joy they brought, when we whisper, "You are free," we are not performing sentimentality. We are literally sending frequencies high, clear tones that help the soul recognize its path. This is why cultures across the planet have created ceremonies on the seventh day. From burning incense and chanting mantras to simply gathering with stories and silence. This is the moment where the living and the departed perform a sacred dance, the dance of farewell and ascent. It is not about forgetting, it is about allowing. And here lies a deeper truth, drawn from ancient philosophy. Everything that has a beginning must fulfill its cycle. The number 7, across spiritual traditions, is the number of completion 7 chakras, 7 days of creation, 7 heavens. It symbolizes the passage from the material to the transcendent. In the context of death, it marks the soul's first full circle beyond form. By the end of the 7th day, if the soul is ready, if it has understood, accepted, and released, its vibration begins to resonate with what mystics call the higher plane. Some describe this as entering the tunnel of light. Others feel a hand extended from beings of pure love. Sometimes it's a parent, sometimes a guide the soul never knew it had. But always, it feels like home. For those still here on earth, this knowledge can transform how we mourn. We are not helpless. Our thoughts, our love, our forgiveness, and our peace, they matter. When you remember someone who has crossed over, and you do so not with sorrow, but with sacred gratitude, you become part of their journey. You become a light in their sky. The soul is still near, but now it begins to move. 3. The 40 days of reflection. When memory becomes mirror, by now, the soul has crossed its first threshold. The 7-day corridor has narrowed behind it like a dissolving mist, and though some fragments of earthly attachment may still linger, something inside the soul has begun to shift. Not because time has passed for time. In the subtle planes, is less a clock than a current, but because awareness is unfolding. This unfolding gives way to a new phase, a sacred interval whispered about in mystical circles and reflected in ancient rites across continents. The 40 days. We find this number again and again. 40 days in the desert, 40 nights of rain, 40 days between resurrection and ascension. In Christian mysticism, it marks transformation. In Spiritist philosophy, it is a time of vibrational cleansing. In Buddhist teachings, the bardo can stretch through this same span, not as a prison, but as a classroom of the soul. This is not a random number. It is symbolic of inner gestation. And for the soul, it is the time when life begins to reflect itself back, not as a slideshow of facts and events, but as a living tapestry of emotion, intention, and consequence. Here, there are no judges, no booming voice declaring what was right or wrong. The soul becomes its own witness. It sees again the moments of love it gave, but now from the eyes of the one who received it. It feels, in full resonance, the impact of its kindness and of its silence. It relives, not through memory, but through energetic empathy. If it once hurt someone, even in ignorance, the soul feels that pain as the other. If it once uplifted a stranger, it experiences the ripple of that joy as if it were its own. Because in this plane, there is no other, only reflection. This is not punishment. This is illumination. And it is here, during these 40 days, that the soul begins to understand what philosophers from Plato to Gibran have always hinted, that life is not just lived, it is echoed. That every thought, word, and gesture generates a vibration, and that vibration builds a landscape. Not a metaphorical one, a real, living vibrational field. In this review, souls are often accompanied, not by stern judges or cold spirits, but by guides, beings of deep compassion, sometimes known to the soul in life, other times recognized only now. In this higher clarity, they do not chastise, they explain. They illuminate what could not be seen before. Here, a guide might say gently, "You chose fear, but love was also present, waiting." Here you turned away not because you were cruel, but because you were afraid. And now you can understand that fear and release it. These beings do not intervene to erase the past. Instead, they translate it. They show how each thread of choice was part of a larger weaving, not for judgment, but for growth, for healing, for liberation. Because even in the spiritual world, the soul can carry wounds. Some are old inherited fears, ancestral imprints, karmic imbalances. Others are recent regrets, guilt, anger at life's unfinished chapters. And so, these 40 days become a kind of spiritual therapy, not through punishment, but through recognition and release. In Hermetic philosophy, it is said that as above, so below, as within, so without. Here, that law comes to life. What the soul sees within unresolved grief, unspoken gratitude, dormant dreams becomes the very terrain it walks through. A soul carrying joy may find itself in luminous gardens of peace. A soul burdened by remorse may walk foggy plains until the fog is cleared by forgiveness. Letting go, at this stage, is not forgetting. It is remembering rightly, not from the ego's defense, but from the spirit's clarity. And yet, this process is not only about the past. During these 40 days, the soul also begins to sense the threads of the future, not always as destinations, but as possibilities. Some feel the gentle pull of service, a call to become a guide for others. Some begin to prepare for a return to earth, to enter a new body and continue their evolution in another life. But before any forward step can be taken, there must be release. And here lies the greatest paradox of love. Sometimes, to love is to let go. Many souls, during this period, find themselves visiting the people they loved, not to haunt, not to warn, but to say goodbye, or sometimes simply to be near. These visits are most often felt in dreams vivid, full of color, layered with emotion. In these encounters, time bends. Words are exchanged without speech. Hugs are felt like waves of warmth. For those still incarnated, these dreams often carry an afterglow, a feeling that something real happened. And often, it did. These are not just dreams. They are reunions. But not all souls can leave easily. Some, in witnessing the grief of their loved ones, feel a pull to stay. Not out of selfishness, but out of compassion. They sense the tears, the pain, the unfinished words. They whisper in ears that no longer hear, hoping for a sign. But sometimes, that hope becomes an anchor, and the soul, meant to rise, remains earthbound not because it must, but because it chooses to carry the sorrow of another. This is why grief must be transformed into gratitude, to say, I love you, and I release you. That is the sacred bridge. For even love, when tied too tightly, becomes a tether, and the soul, still tender from life, needs wings, not chains. So when you speak to those who have passed, speak gently, not with desperation, but with truthful peace. I remember, I cherish, I forgive. These are not hollow words. They are vibrational keys, and when the 40th day comes, sometimes marked by ceremony, sometimes by a simple moment of stillness, something subtle happens. The energetic ties to the material world begin to dissolve. The soul feels lighter, more aware, more centered in what it truly is. Consciousness beyond condition. What opens next is not a destination. It is an invitation, a threshold to a world where vibration becomes form and thought becomes sky, and we will walk with the soul there. 4. Beyond the veil portals of light and the soul's new home. By the time the soul completes its 40-day journey of remembrance, reflection, and release, it no longer vibrates at the same frequency it once did. It is lighter, not in the sense of weight, but in resonance. Like a melody no longer bound to an old instrument, it begins to harmonize with the music of other dimensions. This is the threshold of the veiled realms, what mystics call the higher planes, the luminous zones, the fields beyond time. And what comes next depends on one thing alone: vibration. The soul does not walk through a gate of marble. It is not assigned a room or handed a key. Rather, it is drawn, like a magnet, to the world that mirrors its inner state. In the Hermetic teachings of ancient Egypt and Greece, this was the law of correspondence. As within, so without. As above, so below. Here, that law becomes not philosophy, but architecture. Spiritual portals, often described in metaphysical literature as tunnels of light, misty corridors, or vibrant gateways, are not physical doors. They are resonance thresholds. Think of them as rivers of frequency. Some flow gently, guiding the soul to spaces of learning and peace. Others, darker and denser, lead to shadowy realms of entanglement and confusion, not as punishment, but as reflections of inner density. It's not about being good or being bad. It's about energetic clarity. Souls that have cultivated self-awareness, compassion, and humility, even amidst imperfection, find themselves welcomed into higher vibrational spaces. Many spiritist teachings speak of these as spiritual colonies, vast communities of light, with gardens, libraries, healing centers, and learning temples. These are not fantasy, they are vibrational cities, made not of bricks, but of intention and light. Chico Xavier, one of the most prolific spiritual mediums of the 20th century, wrote extensively about these colonies, especially in his seminal work Nosso Lar, Our Home, where the disincarnated soul of André Luiz awakens in one such city after death. There, the soul learns, heals, serves, and evolves. Many intuitive people from different cultures and timelines describe similar places, shimmering fields where thought creates environment, where love is currency, and where beings of different evolutions gather for mutual growth. These realms are not static, they are alive, constantly adapting to the needs of the soul and the collective. But not every soul arrives there immediately. Some, especially those deeply entangled in pain, resentment, guilt, or fear, remain in what are known as the lower astral zones, also called the threshold, or in some cultures, the gray belt. These are not hells, though they often resemble the emotional hells we create during life. They are vibrational landscapes made of unresolved emotion. Here, the soul may feel lost, reliving memories, trying to understand its place. Some are surrounded by others who vibrate similarly, not in punishment, but in energetic mirroring. And yet, even here, light is not absent. In every dimension, there are guides, mentors, rescuers, spiritual agents who descend into these zones to offer assistance. Not through coercion, but through invitation. The soul must still choose, but the choice becomes clearer when a hand is offered with love. Some souls don't remain in any place for long. Instead, they pass through transition zones, vibrational triage rooms, where they are welcomed, assessed, and given time to stabilize. Think of them as spiritual airports or sanctuaries between realms. In these spaces, the soul may rest or wait for reunions with loved ones, or even meet beings who accompanied them throughout life, unnoticed guardian spirits, ancestral guides, invisible friends of light. And this is one of the great revelations in these higher dimensions. You were never alone. Every thought of peace you ever had was echoed by someone in silence. Every moment of despair that didn't swallow you was softened by a presence you didn't see. Many of the coincidences in your life were whispers from these guides, gently nudging you toward your path. And now, as the soul steps more fully into its new dimension, it begins to remember this, not as an idea, but as a felt truth. Here, the soul no longer identifies as a body, or a name, or even a role. It begins to sense itself as essence, a point of living consciousness in an infinite ocean of vibration. This new home may look different for each soul. For some, it's a luminous landscape, peaceful, harmonious, filled with others who radiate kindness. For others, it's a school where classes unfold through shared experience, not lectures. For many, it's a place of healing, where energies are balanced, where old wounds are gently soothed, where the soul finally rests. This rest is not idleness, it's integration. And after that rest, new questions arise. What now? Do I stay and serve? Do I learn more before I return? Do I wish to reincarnate? The answers are not rushed. There is no pressure, only guidance. Here, spiritual mentors present possibilities. They do not dictate. They help the soul explore its own longings, its karmic threads, its unfulfilled learning paths. If reincarnation is chosen, it is done consciously planned with care, intention, and incredible precision. Every future challenge, every reunion, every gift, every scar, all of it is weaved into the next life, not by fate, but by design. The soul sees this, feels it, and when ready, accepts it. But that is another journey, one we will explore soon. For now, the soul dwells in a space it has earned, discovered, and co-created, a space where time is gentle, love is language, and being is enough. And here's what many never expect. Even in this new world, the soul can still visit, not in flesh, not in permanence, but in essence, a song suddenly playing that carries a message, a scent that shouldn't be there, but is, a dream so vivid it aches with presence. These are not accidents. They are the soul reaching back not to stay, but to reassure, to say, I am well, I am whole, and I am still with you, just differently. 5. The realms of healing and teaching, where the soul remembers itself. Beyond the luminous gates, beyond the vibrational portals and the quiet reunions, the soul enters a realm unlike anything it knew in life. A realm where the laws of gravity do not hold, where sound is light and thought is form, where everything is alive with intention, and the soul, for the first time, meets itself without distortion. This is not heaven in the traditional sense. There are no golden thrones or pearly gates. There is no hierarchy built from judgment. What exists here is vibrational coherence, a world shaped entirely by frequency and consciousness. A world where truth doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. And in this world, healing begins. Because yes, even after the body dies, the soul still carries bruises, emotional scars, grief not yet dissolved, traumas that fossilized in memory, attachments that hardened into regret. Death does not erase these. What it does is create the conditions to face them with light. Upon arrival in these higher planes, many souls are received into spaces that resemble sanctuaries, rooms bathed in soft radiance, where entities of compassion serve not as doctors, but as energy healers, rebalancing what life on earth had disordered. These aren't hospitals in the physical sense. There are no scalpels, no machines, only resonance, intention, and subtle intervention. Some souls, exhausted from the density of their earthly journey, enter a state of deep rest. Not sleep in the human sense, but something far more profound, a vibrational hibernation, where their spiritual body is gently recalibrated. There are accounts from sensitive mediums who describe souls asleep for weeks, even months, being slowly revived by waves of subtle energy. Others, more conscious, are immediately guided into what we might call vibrational therapy. Here, the healing occurs through harmonic sound, light, and what ancient mystics referred to as soul passes energetic flows of intention directed from evolved beings, much like Reiki or magnetic healing, but at an exalted frequency. And then comes the moment when the soul is invited to remember not just its last lifetime, but its entire journey across incarnations, cultures, forms, identities. What we are in these realms is not a body, not a name, but a continuum of consciousness, a fluid, timeless being that has worn many masks, played many roles, and loved in many ways. This memory does not overwhelm. It arrives like a gentle unfolding, as if pages long sealed are opened one by one, each carrying a lesson, a song, a mirror. To support this remembrance, many higher realms host what could only be described as schools of the soul. Yes, there are schools, not with desks or chalkboards, but with living knowledge. Places where wisdom is not memorized, but absorbed through vibration, through shared presence, through experiential immersion. In these sanctuaries of learning, souls revisit the laws of the cosmos, cause and effect, resonance, polarity, rhythm, correspondence, and mentalism, the same laws taught in the ancient Hermetic texts and echoed in spiritual philosophies throughout time. But here, they are not theory, they are embodied. Want to understand cause and effect. The soul relives a choice it once made and experiences the chain of ripples it created, both beautiful and painful. Want to understand universal love. The soul steps into the consciousness of someone it once harmed, and then into someone it once uplifted until it realizes there is no separation, only reflection. These are not punishments. They are awakenings, and slowly, with each realization, the soul sheds another layer of illusion. It lets go of titles, father, daughter, king, servant. It releases attachments to wealth, to shame, to praise, to blame. It sees that every form it ever wore was part of a greater unfolding, not toward perfection, but toward integration. And with that integration comes healing. One of the most extraordinary features of these realms is that learning and healing are the same process. There is no difference between understanding a truth and being transformed by it. In the subtle worlds, knowledge is not sterile. It's vibrationally alive. And this is what frees the soul. The realization that growth is not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to what we've always been beneath the noise. Many souls, upon reaching this stage, find new purpose. Not because they must, but because they can. Some choose to remain in these luminous planes to serve to become guides for other souls, mentors for the newly departed, or emissaries who descend into denser realms to uplift those who still wander. Others begin preparing for a return to form a new incarnation, planned not out of karmic debt, but out of a deep longing to continue evolving, to test new capacities, to bring more light into matter. But reincarnation here is not roulette. It is precision engineering. With the help of spiritual architects, advanced entities who read the vibrations of potential, the soul maps out its next journey. The geography, the family, the challenges, the gifts, the lessons. Even apparent accidents or fated meetings are infused with intention. Why be born into hardship? Why return with a disability? Why choose a family that doesn't understand you? Because each scenario becomes a classroom for a specific frequency, the soul wishes to strengthen compassion, patience, courage, clarity. And once the plan is aligned, the soul begins to prepare. Not as an actor memorizing a role, but as a being fine, tuning its energy for the descent. And yet, even then, some choose to wait. Because there's no rush in eternity, many prefer to spend more time observing, serving, or simply basking in the radiant presence of Source, a presence that, here, is not a being, but a field of pure awareness. The further one ascends in frequency, the more this presence becomes tangible, not as form, but as a sense of infinite belonging. It is this presence, call it God, the One, the Infinite, the Tao that every soul ultimately seeks. Not because it is far, but because it is so close, so pure, that we spend lifetimes peeling back the veils to finally remember. It was never gone. It lived in our first breath. It echoed in every act of love. It sang through our pain and whispered through our doubts. And now, here, without the noise of ego, the soul hears it fully. And we are left with a final question. What remains when all names fall away? Only this: I am. 6. When the soul returns, signs. Dreams in the bridge between worlds. Even after the soul has crossed the luminous bridges of reflection and remembrance, after it has entered the realms of healing and seen itself without illusion, it still carries one final longing. Not for form, not for possession, but for something far more delicate, to reach back in love. To return, not to remain, but to touch the lives it once held dear with a final brush of presence. Because although it has become light, vibration, essence beyond ego, The bonds of love woven through lifetimes do not unravel with death. They simply change texture. This longing to return is not born of unfinished business, nor from attachment. It is born of compassion. The soul, now resting in subtle dimensions of clarity, feels the trembling hearts of those who remain. It senses their prayers before they're spoken. It hears their silent questions in the spaces between breaths. And in that sacred listening, it answers not with words, but with moments that shimmer in quiet mystery. The most natural and universal of these answers arrives in the realm of dreams. Not the dreams scattered by daily noise, but those that descend like velvet in the depths of the night, vivid, luminous, unmistakably real. You know the kind. You wake with tears still clinging to your eyelashes, with the warmth of a hug you didn't physically receive, with the distinct knowing they were here. In these dreams, time dissolves, distance collapses, and between the spaces of breath and thought, the soul and the living meet again, not in memory, but in communion. These are not fantasies conjured by the subconscious. These are astral visitations, meetings of essence, orchestrated in silence and permitted by grace. Why dreams? Because when the body sleeps, the mind quiets, and the soul within the incarnated person lifts slightly from its earthly shell. It becomes more fluid, more receptive, more capable of dancing in frequencies it cannot reach while awake. In this shared liminality, the departed and the living recognize each other again, not as bodies, but as souls who once shared laughter, pain, and touch. And just as swiftly as they arrive, they recede, leaving behind a peace that words cannot name. But the soul does not speak only through dreams. It speaks through the waking world too, using symbols, synchronicities, and sensations. A particular bird that lands nearby and refuses to leave. A song you hadn't heard in years, playing at the precise moment you thought of them. A scent, familiar and impossible, drifting through the air as if carried by memory itself. These are not tricks of grief. They are signals, vibrational impressions left in the subtle field, gently saying, I'm still with you, just differently. Not every sign is meant to be interpreted. Not every visitation carries a message. Sometimes, the soul simply passes by, to stand in the doorway of a childhood home, to hover near a loved one lost in thought, to sit silently during a moment of despair, not to speak, not to fix, just to remind, I remember you. For those more sensitive, or for those whose hearts remain slightly open to the unseen, these visitations may be more palpable. Some feel a coolness on the skin, like a passing breeze in a still room. Others report hearing their name whispered when no one is near. A few, especially children and animals, perceive flickers of light or presence, something not quite there, yet undeniably felt. These are not hallucinations. They are the soft edges of overlapping realities. Realms brushing like silk in the wind. Occasionally, when the soul has become highly refined, when it has chosen to serve as a guide, it can intervene directly, not in grand gestures, but in quiet redirection. A sudden instinct not to take a certain road, a feeling of protection in the midst of danger, an unexpected clarity during a moment of confusion. These moments, though often dismissed as coincidence, are not accidents. They are the soul reaching out not to control, but to illuminate. Still, one of the greatest misunderstandings is the belief that we can summon the soul at will, that we can force signs or demand visits through grief or longing. But the soul does not respond to need. It responds to resonance. It comes when the space is clear, when the heart is not collapsed in despair, but open in remembrance, when the vibration is not pleading, but peaceful, when the soul senses that its presence would soothe, not stir. This is why letting go matters. Not to forget, not to move on, but to make room, to allow the bond to evolve. For as long as we hold on too tightly, the soul remains tethered, not by choice, but by compassion. It lingers near, sensing our pain, feeling our tears like a tide it cannot escape. And though love drives it, this tether becomes a weight, one that slows its ascent, one that confuses its path. True release is not detachment. It is trust to say, with sincerity, I love you, I miss you, and I give you permission to rest. That is the greatest offering the living can give the dead. It is the final torch we pass as they journey deeper into the unknown. And yet, the irony is this: the more we release them with love, the more clearly they return. In moments of silence, in dreams filled with light, in signs so gentle they almost go unnoticed. Because when the frequencies align, when our grief softens into reverence, the bridge becomes stronger, not louder, just clearer. The soul, now lighter, continues onward, but the love remains. And that love, when lived with awareness, becomes a thread woven through time. It is not bound to visits. It does not require presence. It simply is. And when you least expect it, when you're laughing in the sunlight, or quietly sipping tea alone, you may feel it again. A whisper without sound, a warmth without source, a stillness that says, I was here, I am still here, and I always will be, just in another form. 7. The first year, the closing circle and the living bridge. 1 year. A single revolution of Earth around the sun. For the world, it may seem like nothing more than the passing of time. But for those who have loved and lost, for those who have carried a silent absence within their days, that 1 year holds the weight of lifetimes. And for the soul that departed, it marks the closing of a sacred arc, not an ending, but a completion. The first year after death is not just a calendar cycle. It is a vibrational spiral. It begins with the final breath, moves through the soft severing of earthly ties, spirals inward into reflection and review, extends outward in silent visits, and finally returns to stillness, not a stillness of silence, but of understanding, of release, of readiness. In many ancient cultures, this first anniversary was not taken lightly. The Egyptians honored it with sacred offerings. The Hebrews lifted the veil of mourning. In Buddhist monasteries, chants echoed for 49 days and again at 1 year as a symbol of transition. Even in modern hearts, far removed from ritual, the soul of the living senses it, that something subtle but real is reaching a point of shift. And indeed, something is. Because even though the soul is no longer bound to our concept of time, it still honors the rhythm of human experience. The soul understands that the first year is a deep rite of passage, not just for itself, but for those it left behind. In that year, the living stumble through shock, denial, longing, questioning, and finally, quiet acceptance, and the soul, always sensing, always nearby, bears silent witness to it all, not interfering, but accompanying, like a candle in the fog. But now, as the first cycle draws to its close, something begins to lift. It is not a dramatic exit. There are no celestial trumpets. But there is a shift in the soul's energy, a loosening of what was once tenderly held. During this time, many people report strange dreams, sudden emotions, or even a peace they cannot explain. Some feel closer to the departed than ever before. Others feel a distance, like a page gently turning. This is not absence. It is evolution. The soul is not gone. It is simply no longer orbiting so near. It has found its place, whether in a realm of service, a school of higher consciousness, or a sanctuary of rest. It has settled into the frequency it now belongs to. And with that settling comes a soft withdrawal from the earth, bound field. Not a farewell, but a quiet permission to both sides. You may live now, and so may I. For the soul, this moment is sacred, a time to breathe, fully, in its new reality. A time to rise without the weight of someone else's sorrow. A time to become what it could not while staying close to grief. For the living, this moment is an invitation, not to forget, but to shift the form of remembrance, to move from mourning to meaning, from ache to action, from heaviness to homage. Because the soul doesn't want to be a memory dipped in sadness. It wants to be a presence carried forward. It wants to live on in your courage, your kindness, your voice when you speak the truth, your hands when you help another, your laughter when you finally allow joy again. That is how the soul continues, not by clinging to photographs or rituals, but by allowing its essence to live through you. This is the legacy that matters. Not what was said at the funeral, but what you say to yourself now, in silence. I choose to live well, for them, because of them, with them, in a new way. And strangely, this is when many people report the deepest sense of connection. Not when they try to summon the soul, but when they stop trying. When they sit under a tree, when they walk in the morning light, when they do something kind without telling anyone. There, in those quiet spaces, The soul returns not as a whisper, not as a ghost, but as an atmosphere of peace. 1 year is not a deadline. It is not the moment you are expected to move on. That idea, harsh and hollow, belongs to a world too uncomfortable with grief. 1 year is simply the moment when the wound softens into a scar, something you carry, always, but which no longer bleeds when touched. And the soul feels that. It breathes easier, knowing you are standing again. It rejoices, not because you are forgetting, but because you are beginning to remember with light instead of weight. From here, the relationship changes, no longer sustained by tears or longing. It is now held by resonance subtle, sacred, silent. You may still feel them. You may still dream. You may still sense their presence in the way a song plays at the perfect moment. But it won't come with urgency. It will come with grace. Because love, when truly freed, returns in forms more beautiful than we knew to expect. And so, as the circle of 1 year completes, you are offered a choice, not just to remember, but to embody, to become the continuation of all they taught you through joy, through pain, through being. And when you do, something remarkable happens. You begin to change the meaning of death. It is no longer just a loss. It becomes a transmission, a handing over of light, a passage from one soul to another. So that even though their voice is gone, yours carries their frequency. Even though their eyes are closed, you see with their love. Even though they are no longer beside you, they walk ahead of you, clearing the path in spirit. And one day, perhaps long from now, when your own breath slows and your own body returns to earth, you will feel it too, the bridge they left behind, and you will cross it, not in fear, but in familiarity. Because you've been walking alongside it this entire time. And they will be there. Not waiting, just welcoming. Like a friend at the end of a long, beautiful road. Smiling, open arms, home.